My wife left for a month with the hot new neighbor. I filed for divorce, she tried to fix it, but I'm not a backup. I never expected my life to implode on a random Tuesday morning in March. I was getting ready for work, checking my phone for messages, when I found a text from my wife that changed everything. She wasn't coming home. She was staying with him, the guy who'd moved in 3 houses down just 6 months earlier. The whole thing started innocently enough. At least that's what I told myself for weeks. She began mentioning him in casual conversation, how he was so helpful when her car wouldn't start, how he'd offered to fix our broken fence gate, how he was new to the area and didn't know many people. I appreciated having a neighborly type around. Our street had always been pretty quiet, mostly older couples and a few families with young kids. Having someone willing to lend a hand seemed like a good thing. What I didn't appreciate was how my wife's eyes lit up whenever she talked about him, or how she started finding excuses to walk past his house when she went to check the mail, or how she suddenly became interested in gardening right after he mentioned he was planting flowers in his front yard. But I pushed those thoughts away. I trusted her completely. We'd been married for 8 years, together for 12. We had our problems like any couple, but I never doubted her loyalty. The first real warning sign came when she started working out. Not that there's anything wrong with exercise, but she'd never shown any interest before. She bought new workout clothes, started going to the gym 3 times a week, and began talking about getting in shape for summer. When I asked if she wanted to work out together, she said she preferred going alone because it helped her think. Fair enough, I thought. Everyone needs their space. Then came the phone calls. Late evening conversations that she'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd give vague answers about work colleagues or old friends catching up. The calls became more frequent, sometimes lasting over an hour. I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. The breaking point came during a neighborhood barbecue in early March. I watched her across the yard, laughing at something he said, touching his arm when she spoke. They looked like a couple. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, making small talk with other neighbors while my world quietly fell apart. That night I tried to talk to her about what I'd observed. She brushed off my concerns, saying I was being paranoid and jealous. She accused me of trying to control her friendships. We had our first real fight in years, voices raised, accusations flying. She stormed out of the house and didn't come back until the next morning. She said she'd stayed at her sister's place, but something in her eyes told me that wasn't true. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew. She became secretive about her phone, password protecting it for the first time in our relationship. She started coming home later from work, claiming she was putting in extra hours on a big project. Weekend plans we'd made together were suddenly canceled because she had other commitments. I felt like I was living with a roommate who barely tolerated my presence. The worst part was how she made me feel like I was losing my mind. When I brought up specific instances of her strange behavior, she'd have perfectly reasonable explanations. When I expressed hurt over her emotional distance, she'd turn it around and say I was being needy and clingy. I started questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I really was just being paranoid. Then came that Tuesday morning text. She wasn't coming home from work. She needed space to think about our relationship. She was staying with him temporarily, just as a friend, until she figured things out. The message was cold, matter-of-fact, like she was canceling a dinner reservation instead of abandoning her marriage. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone screen, reading the message over and over. 8 years of marriage reduced to a few sentences sent via text. No conversation, no warning, no chance for me to respond or ask questions. She'd made her choice and was informing me after the fact. The first few days were hell. I called in sick to work because I couldn't focus on anything. I kept expecting her to come home, kept checking my phone for messages saying she'd made a mistake. I walked around our house touching things she'd left behind, her coffee mug in the sink, her book on the nightstand, her jacket hanging in the closet. Everything felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare. I called her repeatedly, but she wouldn't answer. When she finally did pick up after 3 days, the conversation was brief and devastating. She said she needed time to explore her feelings for him. She claimed she hadn't planned for this to happen, but now that it had, she needed to see where it led. She asked me to respect her decision and give her space. The humiliation was almost worse than the heartbreak. Our neighbors knew what was happening. I could see them watching from their windows when I came home from work, could feel their pity and judgment. The grocery store checkout clerk, who'd known us both for years, asked where my wife was with such forced casualness that I knew the gossip had spread. I became a cautionary tale, the guy whose wife left him for the neighbor. After 2 weeks of torture, something shifted inside me. The crushing sadness gave way to anger, and the anger gave way to clarity. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for her to decide whether I was worth keeping. I wasn't going to be her backup plan while she played house with someone else. I made an appointment with a divorce attorney that Friday. Walking into that office felt like stepping off a cliff, but also like taking control of my life for the first time in months. The lawyer was professional and kind, explaining the process and my options. I learned about asset division, spousal support, and the emotional hell that lay ahead. But I also learned that I had rights and choices too. The hardest part was filing the papers. Signing documents that would legally end my marriage felt like signing my own death certificate. But I did it. I paid the filing fee, submitted the paperwork, and officially started the process of dissolving the life I'd built with her. She found out about the divorce filing from her sister, who'd heard it from her friend who worked at the courthouse. The phone call came at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after her initial text. She was crying, asking how I could do this to us. She said she'd been planning to come home soon, that she just needed a little more time to sort through her feelings. But something in her voice told me the real story. The fairy tale romance with the neighbor wasn't going as planned. Maybe he'd made it clear that their arrangement was temporary. Maybe the thrill of the forbidden had worn off once she realized the practical realities of starting over. Maybe she'd simply expected me to wait around indefinitely while she figured out what she wanted. She begged me to stop the divorce proceedings. She promised to come home immediately, to cut off all contact with him, to go to counseling together. She said she'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to fix our marriage. The tears in her voice were real, and for a moment I felt my resolve wavering. Then I remembered those weeks of torture. The nights I'd lain awake wondering what I'd done wrong. The humiliation of explaining to friends and family that my wife had left me for another man. The way she'd made me feel like I was crazy for noticing the obvious signs of her affair. The casual cruelty of that text message ending our marriage. I told her it was too late. The papers were filed and I was moving forward with the divorce. She could contest it if she wanted, but I wouldn't be changing my mind. She hung up on me and I sat in the silence of my empty house, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The next few weeks brought a barrage of attempts to change my mind. She showed up at my workplace, causing a scene in the parking lot until security asked her to leave. She sent long, rambling emails detailing her regrets and begging for another chance. She had her sister call me, then her mother, then mutual friends, all trying to convince me that she deserved forgiveness. The most painful moment came when she returned to pack her belongings. I'd expected her to sneak in while I was at work, but she came during the evening when she knew I'd be home. Maybe she hoped for one final conversation, one last chance to change my mind. Seeing her in our house again was jarring. She looked different, thinner, tired, older somehow. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, packing her clothes and personal items into boxes. The silence between us was deafening. Everything I wanted to say about the pain she'd caused, about the future we'd lost, about how she'd thrown away something real for a fantasy remained unspoken. When she finished packing, she stood in the doorway and asked if we could talk. I almost said yes. Part of me wanted to hear her explanation, wanted to understand how we'd gotten to this point. But I knew that conversation would only hurt us both more. Instead, I wished her well and closed the door. The divorce proceedings took 4 months to complete. She contested several aspects of the settlement, dragging out the process longer than necessary. Her lawyer argued that she deserved spousal support because she'd given up career opportunities to support my ambitions. My lawyer countered with evidence of her adultery and abandonment. In the end, we split our assets roughly down the middle, and she waived alimony in exchange for keeping her car and some investments. The day the divorce was finalized felt anticlimactic. I'd expected some dramatic closure, some moment of triumph or grief. Instead, I just felt tired. I signed the final papers, shook my lawyer's hand, and drove home to my empty house. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer, watching the sunset and trying to figure out what came next. Recovery wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and optimistic about the future. Other days I felt overwhelmed by loneliness and regret. I threw myself into work, took up running, started cooking elaborate meals for one. I avoided the grocery store where everyone knew our story, found new routes to work that didn't take me past his house. The hardest part was dealing with well-meaning friends and family who wanted to help. Everyone had advice about getting back out there, about not letting one bad experience ruin my faith in love. Some suggested I should have fought harder for my marriage, should have been willing to forgive and move forward. Others praised me for having self-respect and not accepting her betrayal. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She was alone, looking tired and older than her years. We made awkward small talk. She'd gotten a new job, was renting an apartment across town, was doing fine. She didn't mention him and I didn't ask. When she asked how I was doing, I told her honestly that I was learning to be happy again. As we prepared to part ways, she said something that caught me off guard. She thanked me for not taking her back. She said the divorce had forced her to confront some hard truths about herself and what she really wanted from life. She said she hoped I'd find someone who would appreciate what I had to offer. Walking away from that coffee shop, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage and hurt that had consumed me for months had gradually given way to indifference. She'd become a stranger again, someone from my past rather than someone who could hurt me in the present. That night, I did something I hadn't done since before the divorce. I went out with friends to a local bar. Not to pick up women or prove anything to myself, but just to enjoy the company of people who cared about me. For the first time in over a year, I laughed until my sides hurt. I felt young again, optimistic about possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. The neighbor moved away about a year after the divorce. I never learned what happened between them and I didn't want to know. By then, I'd started dating someone new, a woman I'd met through a hiking group who shared my love of the outdoors and terrible jokes. She knew about my divorce and didn't see it as baggage or a red flag. She saw it as part of my story, something that had shaped me but didn't define me. Looking back now, I can see that my marriage had been dying long before she met him. We'd grown apart without realizing it, become comfortable rather than connected. Her affair was a symptom of deeper problems, not the cause of our relationship's failure. But understanding that didn't excuse her choices or the way she handled the situation. The experience taught me things about myself I never knew. I learned that I could survive betrayal and abandonment. I learned that self-respect was more important than trying to save a relationship at any cost. I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go, even when it breaks your heart. I also learned that I wasn't willing to be anyone's second choice or backup plan. When she tried to come back, she wasn't choosing me, she was choosing the safety and security I represented after her adventure didn't work out. That's not love, that's convenience. Real love doesn't ask you to wait around while someone else explores their options. The house feels different now. I've redecorated, changed the furniture arrangement, made it mine instead of ours. I have new routines, new friends, new dreams for the future. Sometimes I miss the comfort of married life, having someone to share mundane daily experiences with, having a built-in companion for movies and dinners. But I don't miss the anxiety and uncertainty of those final months, the feeling of being taken for granted and slowly erased from someone's life. If I could go back and change things, I'm not sure I would. The pain was necessary, the lessons invaluable. I'm a different person now, more cautious perhaps, but also more confident in my own worth. I know what I will and won't accept in a relationship. I know the difference between love and habit, between commitment and convenience. The divorce papers are filed away in a drawer somewhere, along with the wedding photos and other artifacts from my previous life. I don't look at them often, but I don't hide from them either. They're part of my history, evidence of who I used to be and what I've overcome. These days, I'm building something new. Not just a new relationship, but a new understanding of what I want from life. I'm learning to be happy alone so that I can choose to be with someone from a place of strength rather than need. I'm discovering interests and passions I'd neglected during my marriage, exploring parts of myself that had been dormant for years. The woman I'm dating now understands this journey. She's been through her own difficult experiences and knows the value of taking things slowly, of building trust gradually. We talk about the future sometimes, but we're not rushing toward anything. We're both content to see where this path leads us without the desperate urgency that characterized some of my earlier relationships. Sometimes I wonder if my ex-wife ever thinks about what we had, whether she regrets the choices she made. But mostly, I don't think about her at all. She's become like a character from a book I read long ago, someone who played an important role in my story but who has no place in my current chapters. The neighborhood gossip has died down, new dramas have captured people's attention, and my story has become old news. I wave to my neighbors when I see them, and they wave back without the awkward pity that used to make me want to hide. Life has returned to normal, or rather, to a new normal that's entirely my own creation. On quiet evenings, when I'm sitting on my back porch watching the sunset, I sometimes feel a deep sense of gratitude for how everything turned out. Not gratitude for the pain or betrayal, but gratitude for the strength I discovered in myself. Gratitude for the friends who stood by me. Gratitude for the opportunity to start over and build something better. I'm not the same man who got that devastating text message on a Tuesday morning. I'm someone who learned that love isn't enough if it doesn't include respect, honesty, and commitment. I'm someone who discovered that being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't value what you bring to their life. I'm someone who chose self-respect over desperate hope. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away.